host, Josh, and this episode is brought to you by Great Lakes Disc. Whether you're looking for cool new gear or your new favorite disc, Great Lakes Disc has what you need. Click the link in the link tree and you will see the Great Lakes Disc link. Click that and start your shopping today. While you're on the link tree, you'll also see the link for Idio Sports. If you want to take your game to the next level, make sure you get Idio's shoes on your feet. The only disc golf shoes made by disc golfers for disc golfers. Also use my discount code disc.seeker to save money on your next order. Without further ado, I'll let my guest fully introduce himself, where he's from, and how did he even get into disc golf.
Well, thank you, Josh. It's a pleasure to be here, and shout out to Great Lakes Disc. I love those guys. I'm good friends with Brian the Wolf Frowley, who's over there, and I'm always down for some Great Lakes Disc. So it's cool to see them supporting the show. My name is Matt Rothstein. I am the founder and creative director at the Steady Initiative. It's a new business launched this year. We are producing disc golf history documentaries. Our niche is long form storytelling, kind of cultural, historical storytelling within the sport. We feel like that's kind of missing in the current disc golf media ecosystem. There's a lot of kind of current events, day-to-day sponsorship updates, tournament updates, but taking kind of a longer view of the sport, I think, is something that's missing. And something we're trying to fill.
Yeah, that's so cool. So what actually got you into, what made you get into seeing that there's a need for this? What triggered this?
It was kind of a process of discovery. I was PDGA media manager, so on staff with the PDGA for 5 years. So my job there was often kind of to build the PDGA brand, tell the PDGA story. So a lot of that involved, going back into history, especially early on. I was working with the magazine quite a bit, and they were quite focused on history, especially with Joe Fight, who is the editor there and is a Hall of Famer and kind of one of the original disc golf generation. Joe hired me on there and kind of sent me off to do some interviews that I didn't even know who these people were. One of them was with a gentleman named Dr. Stansel Johnson, who I've since learned quite a bit about, who's now the late Dr. Stansel Johnson, unfortunately, passed away a few years ago. But he is kind of one of the early figureheads in Frisbee. He wrote kind of the seminal book about Frisbee in the 1970s called Frisbee, a definitive treatise. Here it is right here. A classic in the Frisbee literature. He invented a lot of the terminology we still use today. In this book, it's kind of like it's kind of a faux encyclopedia of Frisbee. And so he's inventing these names for parts of the Frisbees, inventing names for styles of throws and angles of throws. And, I think one of the most remarkable things that he came up with was the hyzer. It's in this book that he coins the term hyzer. And the story he told me during this interview was that it was Steady Ed that actually they came up with the inverse version of the hyzer, which was the Anheuser, of course. And Steady Ed wanted to spell it like Anheuser-Busch, and Stansel Johnson put the kibosh on that because you can't be stealing Anheuser-Busch's thing. So that's how we got Heiser and Anheuser. Apparently Stansel found the name Flip Heiser was a name on like an old IFA newsletter he had been thumbing through and like looking for clever names and stuff. And he saw Flip Heiser. He's like, oh yeah, that's the name. That's what I'm looking for. So that was a cool moment. So anyways, yeah, I'm doing these interviews, talking to people like Stansel Johnson, learning about the game. And, I was producing a lot of media for the PDGA. Like I was a co-writer for the Holy Shot documentary, which, a good number of people saw. And that was a pretty formative project for me and PDGA media in general. I was at that Ogden Worlds. I was in a crazy spot when the Holy Shot went in. I was circle's edge, standing next to the executive director of the PDGA. He was holding the trophy. I was expected to interview the winner of this event. So I'm sitting there on my phone, like writing questions for Paul Macbeth, right? Because, obviously Paul's going to win at this point. And, yeah, standing circle edge there, and the shot goes in, and everything explodes around. People are jumping up and down, and it was wild. So I had that experience, and then I went off and we made some commercials with the footage we shot at that event. We made the Holy Shot documentary. A big part of that documentary was the kind of historical storytelling, setting the stage for that moment, that big shot. So we went all the way back. We kind of ran over the history pretty quick. It was actually an interesting kind of dynamic between me and the director on how much of that movie was going to focus on the history of the sport and how much of it was going to focus on the actual events of that world, and like how granular we were going to get in like the day-to-day of score, variance and all these things. And also like the controversy that happened. Cause I don't know how close you paid attention to that worlds or have since looked back at it, but until that shot went in, the storyline was like, wow, this event's going off the rails. There was controversy after controversy. I mean, it was crazy. And then the Holy Shot went in and was like, then that's all people talked about, and it kind of saved the day. So that was one of the reasons that like I felt the name The Holy Shot was appropriate, because it was like we needed it, like everyone needed that shot to go in, and it did. And so that was pretty cool. So anyways, I was actually in the position, if I wanted the documentary to be more focused on the world itself, like if it was up to me, it would have been like real brief intro with the history of disc golf, and then like really getting into the nitty gritty of worlds. But the director kind of pushed in the other direction, wanted more of the historical context, and we ended up with, I think, a pretty good balance. And it really, I thought, was effective for, kind of delivering the impact of like what that moment meant, because it was unbelievable to watch. But putting in the context of the sport that had like, grown steadily, but was still super niche, then got shut down for COVID, and then exploded out of COVID. It was like this dramatic kind of like, whiplash of fate from the sport's going to make it. No, the sport's not going to make it. Then we get to this world, and it's this huge opportunity. We're back. We've got more fans than ever. And then the event's falling apart, and we're losing control of the narrative, and there's all these controversies, and then the Holy Shot goes in, and so seeing that drama kind of like made the story more impactful. And I'm really happy with the way that film came together. So I was always interested in continuing that kind of work. I wanted to make more documentaries. I got my feet wet with that. I'm like, this is awesome. This is what the sport needs. It needs this cool storytelling that tells its backstory, and so we understand what the PDGA is and where it comes from and why we have the institutions that we have. And I was getting close, Josh. I was getting so close. We had a lot of pieces in place to start making a long form documentary about Ken Climo, and we had Climo's buy-in. It was looking really promising, and then the budget, the PDGA ran out of money. It was like we were on this COVID roll. We were doing great, and then all of a sudden the growth stopped, and the PDGA, lost money and some legal battles. That say what you will about them, they were expensive, and I think everyone knows that. And so that's what led the PDGA to really need to cut its budget. And I was part of that cut. And so, as close as I got to making that second documentary, I didn't get to make it. So, I licked my wounds for a bit after I got laid off. And I started writing my own backstory. Actually, it was like my first thing that I did. I kind of was writing my story, how I got into the sport, what had happened to me at the PDGA. I wasn't ever sure I was going to like publish that, but I was just kind of like processing it. And in that process, I kind of started digging more into history. And then all of a sudden, I went further and further down that rabbit hole. And by the end of that winter, I was no longer writing like a memoir or anything about me. This was like, holy crap, there's this layer to our sport that I didn't know. And I'm an insider. I was working at the PDGA. I was doing history documentaries already, and I didn't know this stuff. So that was super eye-opening for me. And the first moment I realized that there was a there, to steal an old phrase.
Yeah. So that holy shot was actually the very first time I actually seen like any type of disc golf. So and I caught it on a reel. I was like, what the heck? How did this happen?
Right.
So my question is, leading up to that Worlds, what was the season looking like? Was it the typical Paul and Ricky battling, or was it just Paul just dominating and then James Conrad kind of came out of nowhere in this tournament? Or
It was that Worlds was like even the lead up to it was unlike any other year. The competitive landscape that's pretty fair. I think everyone was really anticipating, especially on the women's side, everyone was anticipating Kristen, because Kristen had she had won the U.S. Women's Championship right before COVID, and it looks like she was going to break out, and then there was this big long gap where she didn't get to play, and so now she was back, and we're like, oh, she could unseat Paige, and that was everyone was kind of interested to see that Paige versus Kristen battle. On the men's side, yeah, it was definitely Paul Macbeth. Feeling like he got robbed of a chance to win one in 2020 because of no Worlds, and so it was definitely his time. But what was so crazy about that year? I mean, the tour was kind of starting to pick back up. In the spring, the Dynamic Discs Open was one of the first events that I went to that actually had crowds there. Until that point, they were really locked down. There were still like serious COVID restrictions. So I got to, and it was state by state. So it depended on which state you were in. Some states were much more locked down than others. But Kansas was not locked down. So I went out to Emporia, and I was at that Dynamic Discs Open in the spring. And it was the first time that I had been like in close proximity to other human beings, in like months and a year, more than a year, really. I was like shoulder to shoulder with hundreds of people. It was so crazy. And I think everyone felt that way. So there was a bit of this, like, we're coming out of an energy. But what added to it was there was this massive tension going on in the disc golf world at that point between the players, the Disc Golf Pro Tour, and the PDGA. And the big tension was that the feeling was, I think, with the players, that the Pro Tour had their interests, was more responsive to them, and the PDGA was this kind of like aloof, like bureaucracy that didn't really care about them. And so every incident that kind of reinforced that kind of narrative was like amplified. And then there was a really bad incident at the U.S. Women's Championship, was just a few weeks, maybe a month or so before Worlds, where the players were criticizing the quality of the courses. It seemed like they hadn't really thought about the pros. The courses were kind of laid out for all the women's divisions, and they weren't necessarily up to challenging like the top elite pro women at that event. And I think it wasn't clear that they closed the course for practice appropriately or something. Like there were some problems, and Paige in particular got pretty vocal about it. And then famously, the president of the board of directors at that point went on a podcast and kind of laid into Paige a little bit, and that really blew things up. So, there's this tension. The players really want the PDGA to give up control of the professional scene at this point. Like, they're pushing, and it did happen eventually, like after Worlds, and especially because of a lot of the controversies that happened in that Worlds, the officiating controversies, and some of the management controversies of that world, I think is really what pushed the PDGA over the edge to handing over the national tour, the Elite Series events, to the Pro Tour. Because up to that point, there was like these two elite tours in parallel for a couple seasons. It was the national tour and the Disc Golf Pro Tour, and they were both like, were they equal in points or were they not? And it was just kind of confusing. So there was this pressure that was building all throughout that season for the PDGA to do something, and that dam broke after that Worlds. But that was the environment that everyone was heading into that Worlds with. So the tension was high, the stakes were high, the attention was high. Like, we had live coverage for the first time, really, like full out network live coverage, multi-camera, both FPO and MPO. I mean, everyone was there was a real excitement in the air that like I haven't really seen or felt any other time in disc golf. It was pretty special.
Yeah. So you said something about the PDGA and the Pro Tour, like giving up control and everything. Like, have they actually given up as much control? Because like when I tune into like Tour Life, like almost every week, Brody Smith is like pounding on the table that PDGA needs to get things right because they're all over the place. Like they're just make up these rules on the whim and they're not being consistent and this and that. And it's like so like where do we actually stand? Like, does the PDGA actually have too much control? Does the Pro Tour have too much control? Like, where's the issue?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, is kind of a perception issue. I think that the PDGA like is often the fall guy, for when something goes wrong. It's like, oh, it's the rules. The rules caused this issue. When it was like something on the ground. A perfect example of, was there, I forget exactly what event was, but like a disc fell through the basket, at a Pro Tour event, like on camera, like it literally was a made putt that hit the bottom of the basket and then fell through the bottom because like the bars were too wide, and that blew up, of course, because like that footage is crazy. So then like the issue is it the Pro Tour's fault for not inspecting their equipment close enough, or is it the PDGA's fault for not regulating the Pro Tour closely enough so that they inspect all their baskets? There's always a lot of blame to go around when something goes wrong. I think the PDGA does not, just to be clear, does not make up rules on the fly. If anything, it's almost maddeningly glacial, and how slow it can move sometimes because everything goes through committees, and then there's a comment period, and then it's then the board passes it. So there's a lot of bureaucracy, and I think that's one of the things that really separates the PDGA from the Pro Tour, which is the Pro Tour is a private company. I think the staff is getting about the same, close to the same size as the PDGA, but it's still a private company with like a single decision point. The president, the CEO makes the decision, and then they can move on a dime and be more responsive. Whereas, the PDGA, we have an executive director who is like kind of the analog, but at the same time, the executive director answers to the board, and so that's that's a different story when you have to ask seven board members what their opinion is.
Yeah. Because like two of the main things that like you hear like Foundation and Brody and them complain about is that the new time extension rule and then the whole Ricky Wysocki and the stick situation. Like even though it was like weeks ago, people are still going on about it. It's like it's crazy.
It's impossible. I mean, like, if you look at the process that all the sports go through in refining the rules, it is not, it's nonstop because there's always a new situation that comes up, right? Like, oh, we didn't think of an L-shaped stick, who would have thought that was a possibility? So then they have to go in and like update the rules with that little thing. And then, at the end of decades of doing that, you have a rule book that's, hundreds of pages long and reads like a legal manual, and everyone's mad because the rules are too complicated. Nobody understands them. So you simplify them again, and then you run into situations that the rules don't cover. It's like, this is the great cycle of things. So, for me, I come at it from a process perspective. Like, I want the process to be right. I feel like if we went through the right process, and made a decision, with good firm evidence and a good, good input from all the stakeholders, and we still got it wrong, okay, that sucks, but like at least we can feel good that we went about it the right way. Whereas, if the process is not, it's not working properly, and even if we get the right result, sometimes great, but when we get the wrong result and it's a bad process, then it's like, then people really do deserve the criticism, because we should at least have good processes for the rules, and we do. I think the process is pretty good.
Yeah. So when you worked with the PDGA, were you able to play the courses that the pros were to play that week, or do you find yourself being able to play more now that you're not with the PDGA anymore?
You know, it's different now. I play probably more rounds a year locally, which is great. I play at my local course. But with the PDGA, I didn't get to play every course for every event I was at because uh had the job I had was very intensive, especially at events. I was in charge of kind of coordinating our media efforts, and sometimes even like coordinating uh, not the tour's media efforts, but at majors, I had a bigger hand in like making sure that the event media coverage was functioning properly, and a lot of contractors and videographers and photographers and all these things that I had to coordinate. So that was super intensive. I didn't always get to play, but I did get to play enough of the courses to be humbled and to really appreciate how tough those courses are. My goal is always, if I could find one birdie, if I get just one birdie, it doesn't matter how many triple bogeys I had, if I can find one hole to sneak on a birdie, I was very satisfied. And that did not happen more often than not.
Yeah. So, what are your top 5 courses that you've ever that you got to play or you got to cover?
I thought about that, and I made my list based on my own personal like autobiography courses. I didn't go like top courses on tour. So I'll run through my courses, kind of just my own backstory. There's
Perfect.
the course I started on back in Libertyville, which is a suburb of Chicago. It's a classic course. I don't think it's a steady. I don't think the original was a steady ed design, but it was like back when they purchased DGA baskets and worked directly with DGA and Steady Ed to get the equipment. It used to be a fantastic 18 hole that was squeezed down to a 9 hole like a lot of courses do. Then I moved out to Connecticut, to the East Coast, which was probably where I really got the competitive bug for disc golf. It's like the first like serious leagues and tournaments I started playing. I think I got my PDGA membership at the end of when I was in Connecticut, starting to play tournaments. But the 2 courses out there that I love the most are Wickham Park, which is this incredible championship course out there. They run the Greater Hartford Open, which has been an A tour for an A tier forever out there. Beautiful rolling hills. It's got this classic East Coast golf. It's got the perfect mix of wooded holes and open holes, elevation, views. It's one of those physical courses that kicks your butt, when you're done. And I think
Mhm.
they've got some alt holes too, so you can make it up to like 22. So if you play all 22, like you got to take a break before round 2 for sure. And then there's Page Park, which is close by to Wickham. That's also in Connecticut. That was kind of really where I cut my teeth. It was close to where I worked back then, and I was obsessed with getting better. So I would go to Page Park at like sunrise before I had to go to my cubicle for 8 hours, and play around every morning. And started tracking my scores and like getting really in with the little club that was there. I love that course so much. Then my travels brought me to Louisiana. I was in Baton Rouge for 3 solid years. Those were awesome, awesome years with the Baton Rouge Disc Golf Club and the Kingfish Disc Golf Club out there. Highland Road Park, another like classic, I think 1980s, probably early 1980s. Not steady ed design, but definitely steady ed assisted type courses. That it's really unique because it's got some elevation and some little hills, which is pretty unusual in the bayou. It's very flat and not a ton of that great terrain. So that's an awesome course. And then of course my home course here in Fort Collins, Colorado, which is Edora Park. Edora is awesome. It's especially when I'm coming here from the East Coast, it was tough for me to adapt because honestly, the quality of the courses are not as good. I have to say it. The quality of courses here in the Front Range, especially in Colorado, not as good. The scene is awesome. We've got a ton of players, ton of tournaments. That's awesome. It's just the way the land is laid out here. It just doesn't like suit well for disc golf courses like the East Coast does. But Fort Collins and Edora are like an awesome kind of historic frisbee hotspot. We've got the Right Life here, which is one of the oldest like disc golf shops, on the books. And they started in the early 80s, even late 70s. They were the first like disc golf mail order catalog that I ever heard of. This is, back before you could order your discs on the internet. You had to get a mailed catalog out and then, call the number
Oh wow.
or send in your order. And so I had these catalogs from, the Fort Collins and the Right Life. And that's, I was pumped. I mean, pictures and descriptions and options, it's much better than I could get at the gas station in, 1997. So, the Right Life is here. They've run, Bill Wright is like a frisbee, definitely a frisbee legend. He was a freestyle world champion at one point in the late 70s when freestyle was like, the thing, probably even bigger than disc golf was back then. But Bill Wright's owned that shop, and he's hosted world championships here. He's hosted the Whiff Diff flying disc world championships have been here. Am Worlds have been in Fort Collins, not for a long time, but in like the early 90s. So we got some stuff going on out here in Colorado for sure.
Yeah. Have you ever played in Buffalo anywhere or New York?
Oh, I have played more like kind of the eastern part of New York, like FDR, which is kind of like, is that White Plains? Is that the area?
I'm not sure. Like I'm familiar with like Rochester and the West and like Buffalo area.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, I would love to get out there. I mean, the Rochester Frisbee Club is legendary. So yeah, I haven't had a chance.
Yeah, I just recently found out when I talked to Scott Stokely like a week or two ago that Joseph Davis used to hold like tour level events, and he competed here. And I was like, wait, what?
It's crazy. I mean, the little pockets that have at one point been like the central hub of the sport, it's changed over the years. It hasn't always been the same. It, started in California. Then it was big in Alabama, and Tom Monroe, kind of had a real hub there. And then, it's interesting, especially reading in the history from the 90s, people were complaining of like the Midwest cabal, that like the Midwesterners were taking over the sport, and the PDGA was headquartered in Indiana for a while. And, all the big tour events were in the Midwest. So, it's just kind of moved around quite a bit, which is interesting.
Yeah. So what has been like some of the most historic moments or events that stood out to you as you dug deep into the history of disc golf?
I mean, there's so many awesome moments, what era are you most interested in, Yeah. Well, that's a question. Let me ask you. Let's go, okay. So in the 70s, the biggest moment, like the big bang of our sport is probably Ed Hedrick leaving Whammo in 1975 to go pursue disc golf, like as a business. I mean, that's one of the craziest moments in our sport for sure. I love the way that Dan Stork-Roddick describes it. He's like, Hedrick left this job, which was basically an executive for a toy company where he got to promote Frisbees full time. So in other words, like the dream job, right? Like the best job you could have in the world, to go chase something that didn't exist. And Stork at one point said it's like, trying to build a business around the idea that you could email food to people. It's like, this was just, when he told people about it, they didn't understand what he was talking about. That's how risky it was for him to make that jump. So, he made that jump. He invents the disc golf basket as we know it. That same year, he founds the PDGA and the DGA that same year. Without that series of events that took place within like 12 months, our sport is totally different. So that's an obvious candidate. There's this players independence movement that I've really become interested in. Whammo had like really singular control of the sport for many, many years, until the players kind of took control away from it. We kind of made believe pretended that we were a sport for a while, and Whammo supported that and funded these massive events at the Rose Bowl. And then eventually, it's like, have you ever heard the phrase "fake it till you make it"? Like, we were faking it till we made it, and then
Yes.
and then we made it, and the players are like, hey, we're a real sport now, and we would like to establish our own players associations and make our own rules, and not let a toy company basically run our sports, which we now consider real sports. But that wasn't like, that was much easier said than done. That was a huge battle because Whammo had a lot of institutional control. First of all, they had legal control over the term frisbee, and back then that was a huge deal. You told somebody that you played disc sports, and they're like, "What?" And then, "Oh, I play frisbee." "Oh, okay, frisbee golf. I get that." And that was real. That was everything back then. People didn't know what discs were; they knew what frisbees were. So there was that, and they ran all the events. They ran the Rose Bowl. They ran all the regional events. And so they controlled the magazine. There was one magazine in the industry back then, Frisbee World magazine, and that's where everyone got their news. And it turned out that Whammo was keeping everybody else out of this magazine. They were running it like as if it was the sports magazine, but really it was like their own company, promo material. So that all came to a head. It was a huge, crazy battle. And it actually went all the way to the Federal Trade Commission. These players had to like file with the federal government monopoly complaints against Whammo.
Wow.
I mean, it got crazy. So this is kind of one of the main storylines in an upcoming piece I'm working on called Disc Wars, which talks about some of the economic battles and kind of how we got to where we are with disc manufacturers and disc design, which I'm excited about. That should be out soon.
I was just about to ask you, so this question. So at what point did our sport go from, hey, we have the frisbees, now let's change it to like what we actually need instead of like a frisbee where you go to a park and you play catch with your buddies?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's a great question. The first discs to really like become specialized for disc golf were the heavy discs in the late 70s. Ed Hedrick sort of made an accidental discovery. He was making glow in the dark discs, and so he was pumping his Whammo frisbee molds with this like glow in the dark phosphorescent material. And it turned out that this phosphorescent stuff was not just making the disc glow, but it was making them more dense and heavier and more stable. And this was like an accidental discovery. So they made these. There were the Midnight Flyers. I think there were the Night Flyers and then the Midnight Flyers. And all of a sudden, you start seeing advertisements all over the place for they really fly further. They fly great in the wind. That players are figuring out that these heavy discs were just better for disc golf. And then it kind of got out of hand because others got into the market. There was a company called Destiny Discs and a guy named Jan Sobel, who was like a real independent small shop. But he made the Puppy, which was the really first disc that became popular. Maybe not the first, but one of the first discs to become popular with disc golfers because it was just so heavy. And it got ridiculous. The way I understand it was that they were packing more and more of these plastic pellets into their molds, trying to make their discs heavier and heavier. The things got up to like 270 grams, if you can imagine that. Like
Wow.
our max weight discs are like what, 180, about that, or maybe a little bit more for some of the weird molds. But yeah, so they're 270 grams, which had all sorts of crazy implications. First of all, only giants could throw them. So if you were a giant person, you had a huge advantage. And they were dangerous, and there's no regulation on it. So eventually Steady Ed kind of made a, like, we talk about it like he was a dictator for a while of the sport. He made a dictator move and said, I'm implementing a weight rule that limits how heavy discs can be. The players were really pissed. They did not like that. I mean, this almost like caused a revolt at the 1982 Worlds, which is the first PDGA Worlds. But Steady Ed was a very stubborn guy, and did not give in to the uprising and pushed through the weight limit rules. So that got rid of all those crazy heavy discs. So then it was Innova that really made the breakthrough, because Innova's breakthrough was kind of stability and control, not through weight, but through the aerodynamic beveled edge design. And so that was the big conceptual breakthrough. Dunapace got a patent on that design, so they really got control of the disc golf market for a good number of years. Kind of had the space to themselves. There were other companies for sure, but like Innova had this runway where they just they grew and grew and established all these different discs. That was really the moment. Innova's beveled edge breakthrough.
Yeah. So who actually came up with, like, who was the very first person to discover the gyro effect on discs? I know MVP claims that they're the guys, but I'd imagine that there's someone along the way that discovered it earlier but didn't really do much with it.
I think people understood, they certainly understood the gyroscopic physics of discs and that design. There was a Victor Malafronte was one of the early. He was kind of like the first disc celebrity. He was like the first Frisbee celebrity. He was the first world champion at the Rose Bowl in '75, and he was kind of one of the first people that Whammo used as their kind of spokespeople. Put his name on. I don't know if I think they put his name on discs. Certainly featured him in magazines and advertisements and stuff like that. Victor, I know at one point I saw in the Flying Disc Museum, had experimented with modifying discs by like cutting out, by basically doubling the thickness of the rim. He would take an existing disc and then just like fuse another disc's rim to it, so it had like a double thick rim, and he knew that added gyroscopic stability. The rim was more stable. And then I think certainly by the time that Innova had their beveled edge design, the beveled edge plus the widening of the rim, one of the effects of that widening rim is to add more mass to the outer edge of the disc, which is kind of what makes the stability. So I think that principle is pretty well established by then. I think MVP's breakthrough is like this idea of double molding, right? Of fusing together the discs from two different pieces to add more density to the rim. I think that's a cool breakthrough. I'm a big fan of the of innovation coming from a variety of players in the market. I think call me old school, like classic liberal economics guy, but like the experimentation with the marketplace, right? Like you want all these people trying new things and testing different ideas. And I think the MVP stuff is a great example.
Yeah. Now to kind of jump topics a little bit. So where does the FPO field start? And like, has that always been a thing, or has that been something more recently like added? Because that's the side that I pay attention to the most, like when I watch Pro Tour events and stuff. So where does the women start? Like, how did they get into it, and how long ago?
Funny you should ask, Josh. Just for the record, I didn't set you up for this question. That happens to be the topic of the Steady Initiative's first documentary, which is already out and available for purchase. So yeah, anybody interested can go to steadyhistory.com. The landing page, you'll see the trailer for the movie, which like kind of shows you what it's about. And then you can rent it for $3.99. But it basically tells the story of how the women's division came to be, and a lot of the barriers that they faced in setting up a women's division. It was not easy. There were huge controversies at, like, for instance, the Whammo 50K Invitational, which is was the biggest disc golf event that took place in the 1970s. Ed Hedrick was in charge of it and did not set up a women's division. This is the first major standalone disc golf tournament with big funding, big attention, and Hedrick, despite pressure that was being put on him, said no women's division. And there was some organizing that took place, a letter writing campaign, a pressure campaign that took place. Eventually, Whammo changed their mind and invited the women. But the women still did not get their own division at that event. So there were 10 women at the Whammo 50K. they were in the men's division. They played the same course as the men, and they were competing for the same cash prize as the men, and none of them cashed. So it is kind of it's a black mark. One of the black marks on the history of the sport is that the first big money event, none of the women cashed. And there's a page in Frisbee World magazine, from that era, which shows the results, and it's just crazy because you see the two columns. You see the men's, they call it the men's big money results, and you see the list of the men's winners, including Tom Kennedy. I think he took home $12,000 for first place. And then the long list of men who got paid. And then on the right side, you see the 9 women who competed there. And what's so sad about it is that there's no, none of them got any money. There's no cash listed, but the headline over their column says big money women's results, which I just think is kind of sad that they still call it that with no money involved. But that was also the case with the first PDGA Worlds. Ed Hedrick, also another Ed Hedrick production. First PDGA Worlds, this new, association that was going to hold its own championship. This was not a Whammo production anymore. This is the PDGA, the Players Association, the first world championship. No women's division. And there wasn't going to be a women's division in the 1983 Worlds as well, despite more pressure being put on Ed Hedrick by women's organizers and advocates. And it wasn't until Tom Monroe and Levon Wolf more or less said, sorry, Ed, we're going, because they were running the 83 Worlds in Huntsville, Alabama. And they said, sorry, Ed, we're doing things, we're doing things that basically what they told Ed, from my understanding, is they said, Ed, we're going to do it this way. And if you're not cool with that, then this doesn't have to be a PDGA event. They were more or less ready to walk, and Hedrick got the idea by then. So that was it. In 83, there was finally a dedicated women's division in disc golf. Marie Jackson, who was actually one of the women who led the letter writing campaign, like one of the outspoken advocates. It was Paula Elsner and Marie Jackson from Milwaukee, were writing letters pressuring tournament directors to create a women's division. Marie Jackson won the event. She actually won the first 2 FPO world championships. Now this gets even crazier. You told me we can go on and we don't have to keep things short, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay. So this is cool. I'm making this documentary called No Girls Allowed. And in the process, I'm, reaching out to all these kind of historical figures, trying to get input, sharing my document and getting their feedback. One of the gentlemen who I have kind of made a good relationship with is a gentleman named Rick Rothstein. Now, this might be confusing to people because they will notice that my name is Matthew Rothstein. And despite the fact that Rothstein is not a super common name, as far as I know, there's actually no relation between myself and Rick Rothstein, who is like, one of the OG disc golf. He's a disc golf Hall of Famer, longtime editor of the Disc Golf World News, many other things on his resume. So anyways, I made this relationship with Rick. I think my name may have helped me like open that door, like, hey, Rick, we have the same last name. I work in disc golf, let's be friends. But we talked a lot, and we're kind of kindred spirits. And he ended up kind of seeing in me a continuation of the project I think that he had been working on during his career. So he ends up sending me boxes of his old archives. The first thing he sent me was a giant box full of like absolutely mint condition Disc Golf World News magazines from 1986 through 2006. So basically 20 years of like absolutely premium original copies of disc golf's like basically the premier publication of the time, which was unbelievable. And then he sent me, fast forward, the relationship kind of continued. He ended up sending me this box of more or less all of his collected correspondence and documents from like back when he was editing and writing all this disc golf material, but also he was an original board member on the PDGA. He was when the PDGA Constitution came to be in 1986, and Steady Ed finally handed over control of the PDGA to the players. Rick Rothstein was one of the first of those board members, and so it's such a formative time. And he sent me this box. It's it was unorganized and just collected in these old binders, and so I'm digging through this material. I was actually looking through it for images because I was editing the women's documentary, and I was like, oh, there's probably maybe some photos in there. And spoiler alert, there was no good photos to be found in this entire giant box. But I did, go through it, at least kind of like a first run through of, I'm talking thousands of documents. There's probably, a couple dozen of these red binders full of these old documents. But I was able to pull out some just like astonishing little things that came out of this box. And one of them was an original copy of the letter that Marie Jackson and Paula Elsner had been sending out to tournament directors. So here, I've got it right here. This is from my little folder. You can see the date on it. Can you see the date?
Not really.
March 1983 is what it says on there.
Ooh.
So this is, a 45-year-old letter written from Marie Jackson and Paula Elsner to Ed Hedrick and tournament directors, basically making the case that women should be allowed in the championship and, arguing against the reasoning for them not being allowed. So I had heard about this letter. Right, like in my research for the women's documentary, I had heard that this letter existed. There was no copy of it. I couldn't actually read the wording. So I'm in the final stage of producing the documentary, and I'm digging through the box to find some good images, and I come across this letter. I'm like, holy crap! This is the letter I had been reading about. So we were actually on the way out the door for a family vacation, going to Florida. My wife had done a lot of the women's narration voiceover for the piece. And so I'm like, Katie, because I'm planning on doing like a lot of editing for the film in, on our trip. But this is the last time I'll be in the studio and have an opportunity to record her voice. Katie, I just found this letter. She's like, oh, here we go. No, but you got to read this. It's incredible. I'm like, here, okay. The kids are in the car, the car is running. It's in the driveway, going to the airport. I'm like, all right, I know we only have 10 minutes. Just give it your best. It doesn't, try to get it through it cleanly. She did it. She read through it. I was able to include it in the documentary. So it was one of those kind of things that just came together at the last minute, this incredible historical find. But this whole folder this whole box really that Rick sent me is full of incredible treasures. I haven't fully excavated all of them. This folder that I've got here that I've kind of collected all my favorite documents I've found so far is from Phil Heitman, this gentleman who I don't know much about other than he was one of the contenders to be the PDGA historian. This was a thing back in the day when in the original PDGA Constitution. They laid out all these official positions and offices. I mean, it's this ridiculous document that's, long and has 20 committees, there's no way that any reasonable organization could have actually executed this document that they came up with. But among these positions was the PDGA historian, and Rick Rothstein and Phil Heitman were kind of jostling back and forth for this position. It ended up that really neither of them got it because among all the things that the PDGA was trying to do, having a historian on was not at the top of the list of priorities back then. So eventually Phil kind of just threw his hands up and kind of gave up, and Rick was on the board. So Phil sent basically all his collected papers over to Rick and just said, here, obviously I'm not going to be the historian. I give up. But he wrote this letter. This is dated 1988. This is a handwritten letter. It says, "Hi, Ted. It strikes me that I should be careful with what I say because it may become PDGA history tomorrow, but I don't want to flatter myself." And then it goes on from there. But I just love that because it's yeah, Phil, it did. It became PDGA history. Here I am, like holding this letter in a binder that contains letters, unpublished letters from Ed Hedrick to the PDGA. At this incredible formative time of the sport's history, and when we were kind of figuring out, was the sport going to be a legit thing? What kind of sport were we going to be? What was the PDGA going to be within that sport? I mean, all these things were being sorted out, and to have this stack of original documentation is pretty special.
So, was this sport ever designed to be like a very high end possible Olympic sport, or is that us trying to take the sport a little bit too far beyond what it's meant to be?
It's a good question. Interesting at the very beginning, like, not to sound too biblical, but in the beginning, when at some of the very first events that Ed Hedrick organized, the IFA qualification meets, and like the first publications that he put together, it was all basically like a parody of Olympic sports. It was all based on kind of like, we're going to kind of joke like we're an Olympic sport. It'll be like a wink, wink, nod, nod type thing. It's full of sarcasm and tongue in cheek stuff, and it never takes itself very seriously, but it's all couched in this like, Olympic language and pageantry and stuff. Oh, I don't know if you heard that. I got crazy buzz. Yeah. So it's, oh, good. I'm glad you didn't hear it. Yeah. So it's all couched in this Olympic pageantry, and, that kind of faded. I think that was more like the Whammo Frisbee model. When Ed took over disc golf, when he took disc golf away from the other overall Frisbee sports and made it its own thing, I don't think the Olympics were ever really on the radar. He wanted, I think, baseball. From my reading of Hedrick, he was interested in baseball. There's a lot of analogies to baseball, because baseball, like disc golf and like Frisbee, was an American sport, right? It originated in the United States, and it was trying to export itself to the world while still being something kind of quintessentially American. And there was this really interesting battle in the 80s when WIFDIF was first organized. WIFDIF also set up a disc golf world championship in Sweden in 1985, and there was actually going to be two world championships in 1985. There was going to be this WIFDIF disc golf world championship and a PDGA world championship in Tulsa. And actually that is what ended up happening. It's the only year that there were actually, like, because the PDGA did recognize the 1985 WIFDIF worlds as like also the worlds, which is kind of like this weird asterisk in our history. But there's a lot of interesting debates going on in the newsletters back then about, well, how can the PDGA call it the World Championship if it's all Americans and it's always in the United States? And Hedrick, one of his key arguments was, the World Series. Hey, Major League plays the World Series, and this is all in America for the most part. A couple Canadian teams, but like, it's a really close analog to what disc golf was back then, and still kind of is. So essentially American, of course. Now we're kind of like bipolar. We have the European hub, we have the American hub, but it's still not as global necessarily as we'd like it to be.
Yeah. So when you were talking about how it's always in America and like the World Series, that made me think of like an interview on a documentary of Sprint. It covers like Noah Lyles and a couple other American sprinters.
Cool.
And one part, Noah Lyles is being interviewed. They say something about like a basketball team being like world champions. He goes, "World champions of what? Like they just play in America. How can they be world champions?"
Yeah.
And then that's what made me think of that.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think back to the dream team, going to Barcelona with Michael Jordan. That felt so unfair, and yet like everyone loved it. That was kind of a weird thing.
Yeah. So, back to the FPO really quick. So when I got in disc golf, Ta- Kristen Tatar, which is now Kristen Latt, was dominating. She
Yes.
took over from like Paige Pierce dominating. So who dominated the FPO field before Paige Pierce?
Mm. Well, I think, in terms of like a dynasty, I think it would be Valerie Jenkins. Val won 4 world championships. She won 3 straight. I think it was 2007 through 2009, and then she was right in the mix. I think she podiumed 3 straight years, so it wasn't like she was out of it. And then I think she finally, I want to say 2016 is when she got her fourth and final world championship. And her story was really interesting because she famously, right when she finally won that fourth championship, she parted ways with Innova and made a very public announcement about it because she was not pleased that they had not treated her like the 3 and then eventually 4-time world champion that she was. She saw how differently the men's champions were being treated, especially when it comes to sponsorships and signature discs. And not only did she leave Innova, but she made a public statement about it, and it was pretty widely discussed at the time for sure.
Yeah, I feel like the FPO field right now is in a very interesting state because now Paige isn't up to like her top of her game anymore. Kristen is now done competing, and now we're kind of like, all right, who's going to be the next one to dominate?
Yeah, yeah. Somebody will. I mean, I absolutely think it's going to be one of these, probably one of these young women from Europe that have been doing so well. I do. It's definitely one of my regrets for the sport in general is that we never really got a long sustained period of like top tier Kristen versus top tier Paige. We missed out
Mm-hmm.
on that. They missed each other. So there was a few peak moments in that rivalry for sure. But yeah, I'm excited to see who emerges, and I think it's great when there's parity. I also think it's great when there's rivalries. Look at
Mm-hmm.
I think Paige versus Cat. Even though arguably lopsided in like the total win column, if you look at if you look at Katrina's stats in general, like her tour wins, her finishes. I mean, she was clear number 2 to Paige for many years, and of course, then that peaked at the 2021 Worlds, and that was an amazing finish in itself. I mean, that was historic and would still probably be talked about even if it weren't for James Conrad's shot. So that was a peak moment for women's disc golf for sure. And then Kristen, you asked. I'm sorry if I'm jumping the question gun
Oh,
here.
you're good.
You asked who the GOAT was, and I was thinking about it, especially on the women's side.
Mm-hmm.
I gotta say, I think it's a tie right now between Kristen and Paige. I think Kristen was on track to be the GOAT. She was on pace. She won the Grand Slam. She eclipsed 1,000 rating, which I'm sorry, but I know all of the disc golf commentators out there who love to trash ratings, and then when something happens like Kristen breaks 1,000, it's like the biggest news story in the world, and the only thing that people want to talk about. So people love to hate ratings, and people also love ratings. So, but
Yeah.
yeah, Kristen hitting 1,000 was totally an important historic event. But she's got 2 worlds, and Paige has got 5. So if Kristen had gotten 3 worlds and also had the Grand Slam and also had 1,000 rating, then I might have to give the nod to Kristen. But it was like she was so close, and then she left the sport. But both Paige and Kristen, I really believe, have the capability, if they wanted to put themselves right back. Now I know Paige does want to. Obviously, she's out there competing and trying. I do think it's like it wouldn't surprise me in the least if Paige Pierce is in the final group at Worlds this year. Because that's what Worlds does. It adds pressure, and that exposes people's games, and not everyone knows how to deal with that very unique feeling of being in contention at Worlds. Paige knows that feeling.
Hmm.
She's almost, dare say used to it. She's been there so much. So she's got that huge advantage, I think, anytime that she's within striking distance.
Yeah. Now, what about the MPO side?
I'm gonna probably be a little controversial here and say I don't think it's a tie here. I would imagine a lot of people say it's either Climo or it's Macbeth. I'm going clearly Macbeth. It's
Ooh.
probably a little bit, again, like autobiographical, because I've gotten to see Macbeth play a lot. I've been in those moments. I got to see a lot of that history take place in person. So I've got that bias for sure. But I do think that, Macbeth played against a much deeper field. I think, and that's not to fault Climo. That's, you can't control who's on the other side of the net. It's something we say in tennis. I'm come from a tennis background. You can't control who's on the other side of the net, but it does affect kind of your legacy, because great rivalries
Mhm.
make great champions. And I look at somebody like Barry Schultz or Dave Felberg, who kind of came up competing against Climo. They got to like stand on Climo's shoulders in a way, because they got to be the people who were like, whoa, they beat Climo. Holy, that's crazy. But Climo didn't have that person to beat, where somebody's like, wow, Climo beat so and so. It's like, there wasn't that person there for him. So but Macbeth has been unbelievable because of the sustained greatness. The streak of, what was it, top two finishes? I can't remember what it was. Some crazy stat where he's first or second for like a whole decade. Um, he was part of the greatest moment in the sport's history with the holy shot, even though he was on the wrong end of that deal. He got he got the $10 million contract. He, has broken the sport through with his relationships with people like Dylan Cease and like these outside the disc golf media or the disc golf world bubble. I mean, he's a transcendent athlete for our sport for sure. That's why I'm going Macbeth as GOAT.
Yeah, I would. All right, so my take on this is going to be kind of weird, kind of out there. I would say Ricky Wysocki, just because he's consistent. Like he was there against Paul, and
Yep,
now that we see the rise of Gannon, he's still there, fighting
totally.
tooth and nail.
Longevity. I love me some Ricky Wysocki. And again, Ricky is the reason Paul is Paul. Paul would not be Paul if it weren't for Ricky. That rivalry elevated both of them. It elevated the sport. It's so important for especially our recent history.
Yeah, and it's crazy. Like we see the rise of Gannon, and Ricky's still there. He's still giving Ricky. He's still giving Gannon a run for his money each and every tournament.
Yeah, well, he's got, he's Ricky was one of the first players that had, he's tall, he's got the power, he's got the forehand, he's got the backhand, he can hit putts from crazy distances. He's got that well-rounded game that when it's on, it's tough to beat.
Yeah. So as we're wrapping this up, you got any questions for me?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested in what you're doing, and like, yeah, we're kind of both. I don't know when did you start Disc Seeker? Was it this year? Or have you been around for like a full year?
For a full year and like 2 months.
That's awesome. Congratulations. Yeah,
Thanks.
we're both launching media ventures kind of at the same time, and I definitely see your stuff, and I kind of feel like we're swimming in the same water. So it's nice to get to meet you and chat for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Really cool.
Yeah. Well, good luck. I mean, I been really impressed with the quality of your guests and what you guys are doing over there, and clearly the relationships you're putting together with your sponsors. I mean, that's fantastic, and it's always good to have more voices telling stories, asking questions, helping people understand the different parts of our sport.
Yeah, that's what I love about doing this is like I'm not doing it to become famous or anything or like money or nothing. I'm just more focused on like uncovering people's stories. Like not everyone gets a chance to share it, and it's like, come on my show, come on, I'll get you a platform to share your story. That's what this is all about.
Totally. I mean, that's I got excited about that. Like I said, I do a lot of the interviewing, on my platforms. Like, oh, you want to hear about me? Okay, well, hey, don't mind if I do. It's nice, I appreciate the interest, and I do believe in the projects I'm working on. The history stuff I think is really important for our sport. It's part of the maturity process of the sport to become a real grown-up sport. We have to have a real grown-up understanding of where we came from in our history. And I think a lot of it has been kind of nostalgic and mythology, and we have these figures, that kind of like, I see the Mount Rushmore post go out every President's Day of, and there's always Steady Ed and these other, marble busts of our pioneers. But
Hmm.
these people were I think the mythology does them a disservice in a way. They're more interesting when you learn their complexities, and it's been part of the fun storytelling for me is, especially with Steady Ed. He's this really interesting, complex character, and he is, you know, easily fits the role of the villain and easily fits the role of the hero at any given moment, and that just makes for such an interesting story.
Yeah. Without the history of our sport, you really don't have backstories towards like any of our players. Like even our current players, if you don't have the history of them, there's no story of like, oh, Silva is just coming out of nowhere. Like people think she's coming out of nowhere. It's like, no, she's been around for a little bit, and like she's just dominates with this effortless form,
Yep.
and she just holds it together all the time.
Totally. Well, I think the rise of European women is going to be seen from a long view, from a historical view, as a very important storyline. It's there's been this asymmetry between the U.S. and Europe for a long time. I know that we've been desperately waiting for the Europeans to win the President's Cup every year, and I think it's the women that are going to internationalize the sport. It looks like there's real international balance on the women's side, and that's an exciting development for sure.
Yeah, just on the men's side from Europe, you only have Nicholas Antela. I mean, otherwise you don't really have any top MPO guy pushing at the top.
Yeah, it's true. That's not to say that the talent isn't there. I mean, Niklas is unbelievable, but I think it's also an opportunity thing. It's
Hmm.
very difficult for Europeans to make the trip and compete in the U.S., especially long enough to like get used to that level of play and get used to the tour. And so that's changing. The European tour is really developing. There's news. I think I'm excited about the stuff that's happening on the amateur side in Europe, because it's so important to have that pipeline of like, let's have an amateur championship that gives players an opportunity to like see, and are do they have the ability to win a major? Do they like that feeling of chasing a big title and learning from that as a stepping stone? So they haven't had a lot of that in Europe, and that's starting to change. I think the PDGA does have plans to put an amateur major in Europe in the near future, which I think is going to be very important.
Yeah, that's going to be huge because if we get Europe to like like really get pumping players through and then be able to compete on tour, that's just going to make the tour even better.
Absolutely, yeah. I want to, not just Europe. I mean, let's Asia has got great potential. South America has got great potential. There's some we got some growing to do, and when you think about the upside for the sport, it's like, okay, we've got the proof of concept now here in the US and Canada. So it's time to finish the job and grow around the world, and then we can talk about something like the Olympics, if that's really in the cards.
Yeah, one girl that I know that competes really well in Asia that people got to keep an eye on is Ruth. She goes by the name of Blinky.
Okay,
I had her on a
nice.
few months ago, and she plays. She competes in Asia. She's from the Philippines, and she's really good.
I don't doubt it at all. I mean, I loved it when Jackie Chen made a huge splash, and I think didn't he have the highest he had the highest rating for a first time rated player. I think his like welcome to the PDGA rating was like 1035 or something
Wow.
silly like that. So it's just waiting for opportunity, waiting for major events to come around, so that they can get that experience, and the cream can rise to the top, and everything that needs to happen to make a champion.
Yeah. All right, so the final question I got for you tonight is where can people find you and your company, and how can they enjoy the documentaries that you put out?
Thanks. Steady History is our main hub. You can watch the trailer and rent the film there, and then also sign up for the newsletter where you'll keep up to date with new releases and stuff like that. And then also Facebook is our main social media at this point. We're also on YouTube. But yeah, follow us on Facebook, and then go to steadyhistory.com for the main course.
Cool. Hey, thank you for coming on tonight.
Yeah, Josh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you, and have a good night.
Yeah, take care.